Hi everyone, Wismeril here. Today I want to talk about the Ball Lightning build in its tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon push and hardcore version. If you watched the video I published yesterday, I told you that I'm working on several different variants, each fine-tuned for the best way you want to do each activity. Today we'll be taking a look at how you want to assemble your Ball Lightning build if you want to tackle tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon or if you are playing in hardcore mode. Those two variants have in common that they are very tanky. The damage of that build is already to the roof, so you can definitely cut some of the damage and include a lot more toughness, allowing you to very easily clear your tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, facing enemies level 154. And it's the same for hardcore mode. You're going to change a little bit more things, but starting from that push version, you're just going to reassign a few nodes here and there and play with the cheat death passive. Yet you're going to have amazing damage and your sustainability is going to be to the moon. So I assembled a few runs that I did. I choose each of them wisely because I want to introduce a few concepts during each run, and then after this first gameplay section, we're going to jump into the build itself and analyze each of the choices and give you the reasoning why. Now, this first video is here to show you that even if you're cutting some damage out of the Ball Lightning build, the damage is already insane. It's already very good to clear tier 100 dungeons. You're gonna see that you're still able to clear the boss within 10 seconds, 10 seconds of your Unstable Currents ultimate, and the damage is very good versus elites and trash mobs. AoE is decent, single target is amazing, and your toughness is very, very good. You can see that in that build, nothing is going to one-shot me. At most, the walking ballistas shooting you from off-screen are not going to take you down, they are going to hurt. You're going to have to pop a potion, but they are not going to one-shot you. That is if you are in combat. This is how good this build is. I really tried to balance everything to get the most multipliers and damage where it matters, to get the most damage reduction and armor where it matters, and to have a decent HP pool and to max out your resistance. That's what is very important, to have a very balanced build. On top of that, you can see that the mana is pretty good, even though we are not running any of the unique items. This first video will also introduce the gameplay when you're not rocking any unique item. You don't need any of them to play the build. You just need a few vital mana affixes here and there, one mana legendary in the form of the Prodigy aspect, and you need the what's it called, gravitational legendary, making Ball Lightning orbit around you. That's all you need. You don't need those uniques. Look at the gameplay, it's very smooth. And you just need to build smart, okay? And to build smart, you can trust me, I'm gonna give you all the information you need to do that successfully. Now, since we're touching that subject, how do you play the build when you don't have any uniques, or if you're just starting out and you have the needed legendaries and mana affixes? Well, let's look at it. When you find a group of enemy, you're just going to pop 1, 2, 3 Ball Lightnings like that, 1, 2, 3, and you don't need more. Those first 3 Ball Lightnings are going to deal enough damage to clear the first enemies, and those first 3 are going to generate 6 maybe more crackling energies that when you're going to collect them, you're going to refill your mana bar, allowing you to cast more and more ball lightnings as you progress through the dungeon. This is how you play it when you don't have the most optimal gear, when you don't have all those unique items. It works perfectly fine. Just you will be a little bit slower, just little by little you're going to increase the count of ball lightnings while refilling your mana, and you're going to progress into the dungeon this way. This is totally doable, but once again you need gravitational aspect and mana affixes, and if possible a good prodigies legendary roll for your mana sustain. This is not a mana positive build. I mean, even with a lot of resource cost reduction, resource generation, mana generation I mean, and max mana, you are not going to generate more mana than you spend. So that's why you do need to have the prodigies aspect, and then later on the Thibault's Will unique legendary unique item. We're going to see that in the next video. Right. Okay, for now that I've introduced what today will be about, Nightmare Dungeon push, hardcore, and playing the build if you don't have any uniques, let's move on. Let's see why this variant of the build is very balanced and very suitable for this activity in my opinion. So you can see that we're still melting any boss level 154 in less than 10 seconds. I just popped my ultimate skill and sayonara, 10 seconds. All right, so it works perfectly fine. I have to say that my gear is pretty endgame. I have very good gear. It's not completely maxed out. I'm still missing a few things here and there, but I do have pretty good stuff here. You're going to see that in the next second part of the video. All right, let's talk mana management. And what best way to talk about that than to have the most horrible key affix for this build, which is the suppressor ring for every single elite that you're going to encounter in the dungeon. When an elite has a suppressor affix, when you're moving from outwards inwards, any ball lightning is going to despawn as they're going to touch. Look at that. As they are going to, well, I'm not going to do that here, but they are going to despawn if they touch the outer part, well, the suppressor ring from the outside to the inside. And that is more the case if two of them are crossing, right? It's going to be horrible. Yet, you can see that if you manage to have the good affix rolls and build like I'm going to show you in the second part of this video, mana is going to be fine. A lot of ball lightning are going to despawn, but if you walk around and collect crackling energy, you will still manage to respawn them. And of course, when your unstable current ultimate skill is up, then you have no mana issues at all because you're generating free casts of ball lightning and you're generating more crackling energy than before. That's how we'll translate the build into a mana positive build. You're going to generate only when unstable current is up, you do generate more mana than you spend, but the rest of the time you don't. Okay, that's how it works. However, if you look at this gameplay, you see that the build is very balanced between mana, defense, offense, and movement and utility. So I'm going to include all those runs that you're seeing here as gameplay. I'm going to link them in the description part of the video and at the end of the video so that you can watch them entirely if you want. If you still have questions on how I do one thing or the other, just look at the gameplay, analyze it. I'm pretty sure that the gameplay along with those explanations are going to answer your questions. All right, let's move forward. Now that we know that the build works perfectly fine even under challenging conditions for mana, let's look at the toughness. Because we're doing tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, the enemies are level 154. So how do we make sure that we're going to survive, and that we do have a very easy time, I must say, surviving. Where I did cut some of the damage to include, where it matters, damage reduction. Damage reduction is very important because that's the mother of all toughness, if you will. Like, damage reduction reduces physical damage, elemental damage, affixes from the map, everything. So it's not specialized like resistance or armor, it does everything. That's why it's very important to reach important thresholds. So this is the worst map you can have with the worst affixes. Okay, the ghosts, the banshees, those ranged ghosts, they do hurt a lot. And since the increase of density from season 1, there's a lot of them in this room. This room has closed walls, so your ball lightnings will despawn. And on top of that, I chose one affix on that key to be one that you normally don't want. Ranged attacks reduce your percentage, your armor percentage by 5%, stacking up to 35%. So what's going on in here? Every time I'm getting hit, my armor is going to be shredded up to minus 35%. Those banshees and ghosts hurt a lot, and there's a lot of them. Yet, I won't die during those runs. And see, there are even like walking ballistas. Those ones are a pain in the butt, honestly. But if you are in combat, those walking ballistas are not going to one-shot you from off-screen. Now, I do have to say that if you are not in combat, they will. Like, if you're just walking, no shields, no combat buff up, they will one-shot you. But if you're in combat, if you're dealing damage to enemies, and you do get hit by a few of those, they are not going to one-shot you, okay? So how do we achieve that? Well, I really not maxed out, but I did grab all those damage reduction rolls where it matters, and I did decide to cut some damage on the amulet, on the skill tree. The Paragon board is still like completely focused on offense because in my book, you get the best in terms of damage in the Paragon board. And if you're trying to get damage reduction in the Paragon board, that's not the best way to do that because you'll be accumulating a lot of small multipliers. Damage reduction works in an inverted multiplier way. The more you have, the less you get. And the more small numbers you have, the less you increase your damage reduction. While if you do get high damage reduction numbers, such as on your amulets, on your pants, chest, and helm, for instance, where you do cut some damage because you're not running those sweet uniques, but if you do get those here, you're going to benefit a lot more from your damage reduction than if you get many small damage reduction nodes from the Paragon board. So Paragon board is mostly offense with the exception of increasing your HP pool. Okay, that's what we're doing with the hardcore Paragon board, but I'm not doing it for the pushing version. I will explain later. So as you can see, it's working pretty fine. We are maxed out on resistances. Our armor has reached critical thresholds that are going to explain later in the video. And our damage reduction is to the roof and it works very fine, as you can see here. Now, let me introduce another concept when it comes to toughness. Now that we have very good toughness, how do we further multiply our toughness with recovery? Recovery is a way to multiply even further your toughness. Let's say you're that tough, right? When you pop a shield, it is super strong. What makes you even stronger, where if the enemy is not able to one-shot you, it like half-shots you, if that's an English term for like any reason, and you recover that half HP or that half barrier, then you're multiplying by 2 your toughness. Do you see what I'm pointing at? Okay, now let's look at, I'm hitting tab here because I wanted to show that there is the affix that's reducing your percentage armor, but when you kill the boss, it's not there. Anyway, to the point, what best way to introduce recovery than with poison or any dot for that matter. See that map or similar maps that have those spiders and spider hosts. They do apply dots, and usually those dots are so strong that it's going to be more than your HP pool, right? You're going to have more dots running than the amount of life that you have. So I think it's a great map to introduce this concept and show how balanced this build is with this specific setup. You do have a lot of toughness, yet those dots are going to consume more life than you have if you let them tick. So how would you counteract that? With recovery. The Sorcerer class does recovery with shields, and with Season 2, life recovery has been made very accessible for the Sorcerer thanks to one vampiric power. Otherwise, it would rely on a special skill tree affix for fire spec, which I'm not going to talk about today. So, how do we do our barrier recovery? It's mostly done with ice armor. When you pop ice armor, it gives you a base shield equaling 30% of your maximum life. It's not base anymore, it has been changed. And this shield will then add up more shield value based on the damage you do. And the damage of ball lightning is absolutely insane because it's double bugged. You can watch the previous videos if you want to know why. So you're going to generate a lot more shield, right? And this is how you're going to soak up the damage of the dot. That's the main way you're doing that, with ice armor. The second way you're doing that is through the protection node of the skill tree. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with this one. Every time you pop a cooldown, it's going to give you a new shield with 30% max life, okay? So when you have more dots than your HP pool, pop a cooldown and boom, you've soaked up 30% max life of dots. And if you do that a few times, you're going to out-sustain the dot damage with your shields, right? Those are the two main ways you're going to do. And as you can see, we have 5 cooldowns plus a spender, right? The last, well, you can also do that with Flame Shield, but Flame Shield is just going to give you half of your missing HP and going to negate, well, I think it's negating the whole dot. So yeah, it does work also nicely this way. When you have a dot, pop Flame Shield and the dot is gone. I believe that's how it works, I think. And the last way you're going to do that is with the vampiric power that gives you 3% maximum life recovery when you do anything, like when you pop one ball lightning or when you pop a cooldown. Anything you do, teleporting or attacking, is going to recover 3% maximum life. So that's how you out-sustain the dot damage. And in a non-dot scenario, like you've seen before, when there's like 20 ranged ghosts shooting at you, dealing physical damage to you, and you're in combat, you're very tough, and you're going to out-sustain any damage coming your way. So that's a way to even multiply further your toughness. So that's why I wanted to run this dungeon here to introduce this concept. All right, let's move forward. What do I have next? Yes, I think next is crowd control immunity. This plays also into your toughness because it doesn't happen very often that you're chain CC'd to death, but it could happen. And if you're playing hardcore, you don't want that to happen. So we are not completely maxed out on crowd-controlled immunity, but we have a fair amount of ways to break crowd control or to prevent them in the first place. The only one that's missing is the one you would have on evade. It's done through a specific setup of a vampiric power and the Oculus, or there's also another setup. And we are not running that setup here for hardcore and for Nightmare Dungeon Push because it's not the most optimal way. It's not the best they are not best in slot for Nightmare Dungeon Push and for hardcore. All right, so what's going on in here? I choose that key. It's just a 92 dungeon, but it's not there for the damage. It's more to show like very annoying crowd control. I choose that key, even though it was not a 100, because it had ranged enemies slow you down by 50%, which is super annoying. Let's be honest, I hate that affix on a key if I'm not running a very good immune, like uncontrollable build. Okay, so there's this one, and there's a lot of, not a lot, but many ranged enemies in that dungeon, right? You do have some melee enemies, but here and there you'll have, I would say, many ranged enemies that are going to debuff your movement speed. On top of that, I choose that dungeon because it has those fly hosts that are very annoying. Those like walking brains that spread flies all over the place, and those flies, they do slow you down by a large amount. I think it's more than 50%. I'm not sure, I don't have the value, but they do slow you a lot, like I'm thinking 60. So you see we have those two here. Unfortunately, I was not able to get a key where elites would have a very annoying crowd control affix, but you get the spirit of what I'm trying to introduce here. We do have 3 ways to break crowd control. Teleport, of course, Flame Shield, of course, and we are running the legendary power that makes Ice Armor give you immunity to crowd control for 5 long seconds. And that one is really important. You could go all the way with the evade one, but we're going to see that in the next video where we begin to pile up some uniques, and those will be more suitable for speed farming scenario, not really push or not really hardcore. So you see we have several means to break CC or prevent them from coming in the first place. You can watch the full run if you want, but I can tell you I'm running this very annoying affix in this dungeon, and it's not slowing me down by a bit. The build is really balanced. You're not going to suffer from crowd control. So with hardcore, you're not going to die being chained CC'd. Okay. Right. So I think that was the last concept that I wanted to introduce with this gameplay introduction. We are going now to analyze what makes this build great and super balanced for hardcore and for pushing your nightmare dungeons all the way to tier 100. Alright, let's look at the gear, vampiric powers, legendary powers, skill tree, and paragon boards. I must confess that I do have a late game character. My gear is not completely perfect, but it's close to perfection. So, but I can say that you will achieve very similar results if you're assembling the build the same way than I did. Okay. First, let's start with the mandatory things if you are assembling the ball lightning build. There are some things you do need to get first for the build to function before you even consider toughness, damage, utility, and all those things. You do need to have resource generation and maximum mana rolls on both of your rings. This is very important. Even if that's the only 2 affixes you have out of the 4, you do need those ones. It's mandatory. You also need some maximum mana roll on your helm, and you need, possibly, this is not always the case, most of the time for your offhand, just look for the highest eye level value, i.e. 925, like this one, that you do farm out of the upper bosses. That's how you will get your weapon and offhand. And when you do get many of them that are 925, choose the one, if you can, that's going to have resource generation, mana cost reduction, and the last one is a roll that says lucky hit, up to 5% chance to restore up to 21% of your max mana. You want some of those 3 or all 3. You see, I don't have all 3, I just have resource generation, but that's what you want to get over here. And you want to get a 5% chance to restore up to 21% max mana roll on your gloves. You do need that. This is mandatory. Along with that, you need the Prodigy's Legendary. You can get it from the codex with value 15, the more the better, obviously. I do have a 25, you can get away with a 15, but you do need to have one. Last thing that you do need is the Gravitational Legendary. That's the one that makes ball lightning orbits around you and deal multiplicative increased damage. That's what you need. If you don't have that, don't try to assemble that build. Look for the Chain Lightning / Charged Bolt starter build that I've put on the channel, which is the best farming build when you have nothing. You can get everything from the codex. The mana is free, the damage is very good. You have single target with Chain Lightning, AoE with Charged Bolt. It's a very balanced build and you don't need anything. Now for that one, you do need a few things. Once you have this, how are you going to assemble the build? There are many different variants that you will find on YouTube, on the internet, right? This one is the best setup for hardcore and Nightmare Dungeon tier 100. So we are heavily focusing on toughness at the cost of damage. The build is broken, busted, OP. You have the damage, don't worry. You do need, on the other hand, to get the toughness. Let's start with the amulet, helm, chest, and pants. We are not running any of the uniques because guess what? Those uniques don't have any defensive legendary power. They do have one affix that's defensive, but everything else is either offensive or utility, grouping and stunning. We don't want those. We want to be as tough as possible. And on the amulet, same story. We are not running an offensive legendary and we're not running offensive affixes. We want defense. The mother of defense is damage reduction because it applies to everything. The first legendary power that you want to get is Mage Lords. It says if you're running the Veer's Mastery key passive, when there are enemies that are up close, melee range, you're going to benefit from damage reduction. Up to 3 enemies, each enemy is giving 13.5. If 3 enemies are within melee range, you get 40% damage reduction. This number is huge and it's going to do a lot for you. It's better to have, when it comes to damage reduction, it's better to have a few big numbers than a very large small numbers, if I make sense here. Because those are inverted multiplicative, if it makes sense. Sorry, I'm not a native English speaker. But basically, let's say you get 5% damage reduction, that's worse than getting 40%, okay? So that's why this one is huge. Starting off with 40% damage reduction is big. Next, when you're in combat and you apply vulnerable to enemies, we'll see how we do apply vulnerable, you're going to debuff them for 25% damage reduction. That's also a big number. On top of that, you're getting smaller numbers, but large enough that they do matter. On both your chest armor and pants and amulet, those are the only places where you can get that. You want to get damage reduction from close, distant, and burning. Why? Because the max value is the biggest one, like 20%, 23, and 17. Damage reduction period only goes up to 10%. So that's why it's not best in slot. You want to get those 3 on your pants, chest, and amulet. On the amulet, you see I didn't get it. I have damage reduction instead of damage reduction from close. So it's not best in slot. Yet this amulet is very good. The last affix on the amulet has to be mana cost reduction, just as the one you get from your boots and offhand if you can, except that the one on the amulet has double the value of boots or offhand. So that's why you really want to have it here. The fourth roll on the pants is going to be ranks to ball lightning because it scales a multiplier, the multiplier of ball lightning. And on the chest armor, the last one you would want normally is armor instead of damage reduction. But if you look at this this chest armor that I got, when I rolled the maxed out value for damage reduction, I was like, it's probably doing more for me than a maxed out value of armor. I'm not 100% sure. I would have to run the math. So I kept it this way. But long story short, you want damage reduction from distant close burning, and here you want more. You would want percent armor because it spreads your damage reduction better. Armor is reducing damage from physical damage, so it's a kind of damage reduction that has its own way to be calculated. Long story short, you want those 4 here. And having those, you're really good on the damage reduction front. But wait, there's more. And you do need more. If you don't want those walking ballistas to one-shot you from off-screen, trust me, a level 154 walking ballista hurts. It packs a punch, like it hits like a truck. You do need that toughness. This one's not really for the ballista, but it's for melee damage reduction. That's 20%. And it goes up to nearly 25 if you crit. That's pretty good. You have access to this one, where enemies are going to deal 15% less damage if you crit them. Pretty good. And you have that one, your big spender, your whale with that build. So this one's gonna up most of the time, 21, that's a huge number, 21% damage reduction. So in the skill tree, you have access to damage reduction, and the lightning builds historically have better toughness. Well, every build is different, but it has access to a lot more toughness than fire or cold. And you do want to run those in hardcore and in Nightmare Dungeon Push. Don't worry, we're going to play with overflowing energy, resetting, unstable current being up all the time in the speed farming variant. But again, this is hardcore, or this is Nightmare Dungeon Push, and this is best in slot, Veer's Mastery. Trust me. So that's for the toughness of your skill tree. And now let's talk about the Paragon board. Paragon board, in my book, this is where you get your damage. This is where you get your multipliers. And this is where you stack your additive buckets to the moon. You want to get the big values for this bucket where it matters. The small values don't matter that much usually, so you could swap them, but I made the most optimal build for dungeon pushing, and for hardcore I'm going to remove those tiny additive increase and will instead max out our HP pool. Not max out, but increase our HP pool. It'll be a lot more balanced. Now this build is a 7 board 6 glyph build. It's different from the one I've shown in the previous video where I was running the Imbiber glyph. Where are you here? For 107, if I remember correct, percent additive damage. And instead, it's a lot better to run this multiplier that you're going to scale anyway with your non-physical damage. We're not running any cold damage affix, yet we're scaling this one nearly to the maximum. You can't scale it more than 26%, but hey, it's a pretty good deal for something that's normally with cold damage, but applies to any damage to vulnerable targets. This one is a 26 multiplier is a lot better than 100% additive damage. So that's why this one is best in slot over here. For the rest, it's the same. It's the same 7 Paragon boards tables that you've seen from before, where we take extreme care to maximize everything we can. The 5th board, where usually it's quite difficult to get the bonus from a rare node, is getting it. And you don't need any dexterity roll on your gear. I hate to tie Paragons with gear. Paragons is self-sufficient. By just running this setup, you will meet this bonus for fire resistance, which will help you to optimize your rolls on your gear and to have access to max fire resistance, basically max resistance everywhere with this setup. We're also taking care to have 432 willpower out of 430, so that everything below the 5th board, we get the bonus. It's important to get those non-physical damage additive. They are additive, so they have diminishing return, but they double dip because they are in the additive bucket, and they also scale your multiplier over here. So we do want them. Plus, those ones are two things we want: non-physical damage and damage to elites. Hell yeah. This one's nice because it's non-physical damage and max life. Usually I look more for rare nodes that would say something like this, both damaging affixes. But in the case of that build, for that variant, it's nice to extend a little bit your maximum life pool, and we're going to grab the remaining ones for the hardcore variant. So that's just the same. We're running we're maximizing mastery skill damage in a 75 intelligence board for maximum efficiency and increase the RIA on the ball lightnings. We're getting a multiplier here with additive damage. We are getting mostly dexterity glyphs for the multipliers. We are getting the best 2 dexterity boards here with destruction, because that's the highest additive number on top of the multiplier, and territorial, because this one is tied with flame feeder, but territorial doesn't need you first to set the enemy ablaze before it applies. So this one has the upper hand. That's why we're putting it in a 49 dexterity board. And we're also getting damage reduction from that glyph. Not that we do want to get that from paragons, but it's nice. It complements very well the rest. Okay, and that's about it. Basically here it's a multiplier. Those two are 39 dexterity, and those two are 49. This one 75 intelligence. We try to maximize everything with that build. The last remaining points in this non-hardcore setup go into the 5% additive damage, but those ones you will see I reallocate them to increase our HP pool in the other setup. Over here, we get some non-physical damage for the multiplier on the 7th board, and we also get a nice increase to max resistance on fire and lightning that we do get to max out. I also have to highlight that we're extending by 3% even further to fire, ice and cold, and 78 to fire and lightning specifically. So that's for the toughness. Now let's talk offense, because you see I did cut here and there a few multipliers, especially on the uniques, and on the amulets I did cut some things, but it still hits like a truck. So it's still pretty good on the offense. Let's look at what's remaining. So I covered that one. Yeah, so we are keeping the best generic multipliers. This one, a target being vulnerable, you having a barrier, that's a 30% multiplier. And that's one, just you having a barrier, is a 25. It applies to poison damage that we are going to see matters in a while. All right, and the uptime of Elementalist is not as high as I expected, even on a late game build. I mean, when you're not running the unique pants. So I choose to put that one. We're keeping it, but we're definitely not putting it over here. We need some defense, but we're keeping it and putting it on our weapon. The uptime is decent. It's maybe 1/2, 1/3 of the time, ballpark estimate. Which is nice. If you play very carefully, you can get more uptime on that, but we do need that for our defensive buffs, which is that one over here, and this one over here. If you crit, that's a 25% damage reduction, and the synergy with resetting your defensive cooldown, and of course, getting more static ball lightnings as we run this as one of our enchantments, and getting more crackling energy from this. So it's definitely best in slots, even if the uptime on more than 100 mana is not 100%. You do need that. It's just we are not putting it on the amulet. Right, on the boots, we want the 40% damage multiplier against bosses, the butcher, those vampiric sorcerers, barbarians, druids and stuff, because they are just like bosses, and structures. So we do want this multiplier over here. It's best in slot. I think that's about it for the offense on the gear. Yeah, about defense on the gear, sorry, I didn't cover the armor. We are running Disobedience and Snow Veiled over here. The way this works is you're going to sum up all those numbers and then multiply your overall armor. So 66 plus 30, that's 96. Plus normally here you want a max armor roll, and here you do have another one. So that's roughly 150% armor. So you're going to multiply your armor, which is the sum of your chest armor, helm, pants, gloves, and boots in the order of importance. Those two are tied. And then the sum of this is going to be multiplied by 2.5. That's going to give you you're reaching a breakpoint where the damage reduction on physical damage is really optimal. So that's why you want to run this setup with the Snow Veiled and the Disobedience over here, instead of having all three uniques that are purely offensive over there, right? That's for armor. Let's talk resistance a little bit. So you're going to be maxed out on fire and lightning at 78% in combat. On everything else, you're maxed out, because in combat this goes to 70. In combat, this is close to 70. But like 66, so that one's not really maximized. I don't think there's much I can do about it. Cold is not maximized because my roll on the boots is not optimal. It's only 30. 15 more would be perfect. So I could have 78, 78, 7 up to 73, 70, and this one would be 66. Unfortunately, there's one of the 5 in this build that's not going to be maximized, because you're spreading gems in your jewelry and only getting 2 rolls on your boots, because over here I want max armor instead of resistance, and it's the best setup you can have, really. Okay, you're going to miss out on maybe 5% resistance on one of them, and that's it. The rest is very optimal. Resistance, armor, damage reduction, and HP pool, as we're going to see in a moment. Okay, in terms of offense, I did talk about everything, so that's for the gear. You can find anyway the max roll planner in the description of the video, where you have everything you need. I'm running a pretty late game version of that build, having maxed out pretty much everything. I just need to find better boots with a higher cold resistance, but basically that's pretty good stuff. Let me just double check. I think, yeah, I covered most of the thing that matter over here. Let's talk vampiric power. Let me just make sure that I covered everything that matters. Quick word on Lightning Spear. You remember that footage where I was in the dungeon with all those banshees and ranged ghosts? Lightning Spear plays a huge role in stunning. I feel like it's attacking more often than not ranged enemies than melee enemies. So it's going to stun those ballistas, ranged ghosts and stuff. So this one is best in slot over here. And of course, when your unstable currency is up, there's going to be millions of them. And they are going to play a very nice role in keeping you alive from those ranged attacks. And the rest is pretty much self-explanatory, or I did cover it. So yeah, we're good. We're going to talk vampiric powers. Vampiric powers. Okay, so you're going to run the most busted vampiric power in Season 2, Ravenous. In this build, it's going to be around 50 to 55% attack speed, extra bonus attack speed. The way you're going to make enemies vulnerable is you need them to have a Vampiric Curse, and you're going to use that one instead of the classic Metamorphosis and Oculus, because it's best in slot over here not to run the Oculus, but rather have a regular one with all those multipliers, offensive multiplier. And you don't want Metamorphosis to apply Vampiric Curse. You want the regular Accursed Touch, which, you know what? The lucky hit chance is low on Ball Lightning, but it attacks very frequently, and you're gonna have a lot of them. So the uptime on Vampiric Curse is super huge with that build. Quick word, Vampiric Curse stores Soul's 200% increased damage, doesn't scale. Maybe it does damage when you're speed farming, when enemies are same level than you, but when enemies are level 154, this doesn't scale. So it's not doing damage. It's maybe doing 0.005% of your overall damage, so don't consider that a damage dealer, right? We're only using that to apply Vampiric Curse to make them vulnerable and to benefit from a few synergistic things. So those two best in slot, this one best in slot, that's, hey, another multiplier when they are vulnerable. This one might surprise you because it's poison damage. Poison damage in that build scales very well. Most of the multipliers are generic, except a few that are related to Ball Lightning or a few additive damage ones that are in the Paragon boards that are only related to Mastery skill, but for the rest, everything else is going to scale those 70% poison damage hits. And given how frequent Ball Lightning hits and how many of them you have, this is mostly for single target damage on the boss, Butcher or whatever, right? It's going to speed up a lot your boss fights. This deals a lot of damage, okay? You're going to proc that very often on single target. In hardcore, you're going to swap that for another one. I'm going to show you soon. And the last one, last but not least, recovery. I told you recovery is done in the sorcerer class with barriers. This one is huge. We didn't have access to that before. So you definitely want to run that on your hardcore setup and for pushing nightmare dungeons. So that's about it for the softcore nightmare dungeon push version. Now let me show you what's different with the hardcore version. On to hardcore. The main difference between softcore and hardcore will be your first enchantment. Softcore, you want to run the Ball Lightning enchantment for those static Ball Lightning that are going to add a lot of damage, a lot more damage, a single target, and possibly here and there for elite fights and during your dungeon runs. So you want to swap that obviously for a cheat death because you don't want to lose your character in hardcore. The gear is exactly the same. Nothing changes there, okay? Just swap your enchantment. In the skill tree, what did I do? Yes. Well, you can do that, or maybe you don't, but you can remove those 3 glass cannon points because it's a little bit more incoming damage. You could leave it there, but if you do remove them, put 2 points in align the elements, and maybe 1 point over here to, because you're losing a big multiplier here, 18%, and this one is not going to give you 18, but it's going to give you another multiplier. You could do that, or maybe you don't want to do that. You're perfectly fine. The build is strong enough, but you know, I'm a perfectionist. And the rest is exactly the same when it comes to the skill tree. So that's, you could just swap this. Paragon, that's where, okay, no, before Paragon, let's talk Vampiric Power. The only difference is this one. Here we used to have the poison damage that's used for single targets. In hardcore, you may want to use that one to be completely safe. If you take a big hit that's going to put you half-life, you're going to get a little bit of damage reduction. This one can save your life. So I'd recommend to get that one and to cut the single damage, which is already very good on this build, let's be honest. So you could run that. And when it comes to the Paragon board, that's pretty much the same setup. 7 board, 6 glyphs, this multiplier over here. The only thing that I changed was I did get rid of a few 5% additive nodes in order to get the max life nodes here, and here a little bit more maximum resistance. So you're going to be capped on everything, including the shadow in my previous example, if you run this setup. And I did grab one over here, I believe. That's the only difference. You have, what's that, 2000 more maximum life. Yes, my character is nearly maxed out. I was running 10,800. So on a maxed out character, that would be 12,200. So a little bit more. But you get the spirit, right? You want to be on the safe side if you're playing hardcore, and this is definitely how you're going to achieve that. Actually, I think I should run this in hardcore because my damage is pretty good, and this node over here is gonna maximize all my resistance, and as a perfectionist, I like that, and it's gonna give me a little bit more HPs to play with, and honestly, the damage is already super good on that build. So I would keep the enchantment, but I would just like maybe change to that paragon board over there. Anyway, guys, this is my take on the best way to assemble the hardcore variant and the Nightmare Dungeon push variant for the ball lightning. Tomorrow I'm going to walk you through other setups. So we do still need to run the speed farming, or the speed farming is gonna be sweet because that's when we're going to include all those uniques, and that's really nice. So we're gonna do Nightmare Dungeon speed farming. I'm not sure which year is gonna be, maybe 80, maybe 70. We'll tell you tomorrow. We're gonna do Blood Harvests and Hell Tides speed farming. So that's gonna be one video. There's gonna be a video, of course, about taking down Lilith and Juriel and all those single target Uber boss, or the world boss if you want to do it solo in hardcore. We're gonna do the leveling setup. So I'm gonna have a few more videos, one per day. Stay tuned. We're going to really make the most out of ball lightning, having the best and coolest setups you can have. Cooler than the other side of the pillow, right? This was Wismeril signing off. Stay safe, have fun, farm all those nice uniques, push your glyphs to 21 with that build, and be safe in hardcore. I'll see you in the next video.